Hello, I'm Dr. Jim Coyle, and this tutorial discusses the stages of family therapy. In particular, how do you collect data from family and how to make family assessments. As we go along, I suggest that you jot down your ideas and your questions and your reactions, because we're going to talk about this during an in-class discussion as well as small group discussion and exercise. In general, the social work treatment model focuses on engagement, which is an ongoing process, data collection, which the client describes what's going on, assessment, which is the worker's interpretation and conclusions about the causes that maintain the causes and maintenance of the presenting problem, what the overall goals and measurable objectives are, and the intervention that helps reach them, as well as evaluating how we know our efforts are successful, and finally terminating because treatment has been accomplished. For families, family therapist Jay Haley has suggested stages during the first interview. The social stage is where introductions occur and who's in the family is identified. The worker models courtesy and listens to all the family members. This then leads to the problem stage, in which the family explains why they came in, getting opinions from each member, allowing the family to decide who speaks in what order. The worker shows helpful interest without interpreting or giving advice. They observe family interactions without commenting on what they're seeing. They're just trying to get a sense of how does the family work. During the interaction stage, the therapist asks the family to talk to each other about the problem or to act out the problem. This leads into defining desired changes, where there's a clear description from all family members about what they want to see changed, and this can lead to a contract about what is going to happen. Ending the interview, it's important to focus on, will there be a next appointment and when, and who will attend, what the focus of treatment is, which is based upon what has been discussed about desired changes, as well as any directives or homework that the worker would like the family to do before returning. It's important to recognize that in addition to what you've learned about engaging individuals, engaging a family has a few more aspects to it. Joining is a term that's used to indicate when the worker uses the family's style of interaction in order to kind of help engage the family, but then also to model different things the family may be able to do to make things better. Balancing is really important because you need to include all members, not just the most vocal or the ones who seem to want the most attention. It's also important to consider whether the worker's family of origin experiences are helping or challenging engagement. There are some families that you just love to work with and other families that are really challenging for you. Recognize and take a look at what influences those feelings that you have. Family data collection asks family members to describe who does what their roles are, what the problem is and what they think influences it, what they would like to change, much like Jay Haley defined. And also, as he talked about, observing family interactions is usually better than asking the family to tell you what their interactions are. So you look at who sits where, who speaks when, what their agreements or disagreements are, and how they come about. What occurs when the family acts out the problem. You can see a lot about how families work just by watching what they're doing, and you'll be able to learn more than asking them to somehow intellectually describe the connections, which they don't necessarily do because they're just used to seeing them happen and not paying attention to them. It's also important to recognize how the family may react to the therapist wondering about the meaning of interactions or possible family behavior changes. So if the therapist says, well, I wonder what would happen if this occurred, or I wonder what would happen if this change happened. Notice that when you wonder about things, when you're suggesting, gee, you have a question about what would happen, that is a lot easier on family homeostasis than just saying, well, tell me if you did it this way. Generally, you wait to share your interpretations until the family's had a chance to share their ideas about what influences it, and you can have a chance to share your own assessment, which I'll talk about in a moment. Family data collection should also include the individual and community factors, which may positively or negatively influence what the family's going through, the possible impact of racism, oppression, or how cultural beliefs may influence the family's expectations, as well as their amenability to change or adapt. Social workers may need a little bit of time to think through things in order to get to their assessment, and sometimes taking a break may be necessary to help them do this. Assessment includes defining what is happening in the family. In other words, what happens to whom, when, how much, for how long, influenced by what, resulting in what. It's giving a sense of what is actually going on. In families, you're focusing on family systems and circular causality. How are the family dynamics influencing the presenting problem, as opposed to how does each individual family member influence the presenting problem? And that's an important distinction that'll make a big difference on whether working with the family really works well or not. The worker collaborates with the family's assessment of what's going on. And so you first ask the family, what did they think influences, and how do they think their working together helps or doesn't help what's going on in the family? Most models will share this assessment with the family. There's a few models that have other ways of managing this. The worker may use reframing if the family accepts it. Reframing is a technique in which you suggest a different way of viewing the problem. And again, using words like, well, it seems like this may be going on, or I wonder what would happen if this change occurred, generally are easier for the family to accept and talk about than being very judgmental and saying, well, this is what causes the problem in your family. That can be very difficult for families to hear. Finally, the assessment should explain how the goal is formed and why the interventions are going to be helpful in accomplishing this goal. An example of this process is a parent may come in and say the teen doesn't follow rules and misbehaves. Well, the teen may say the parent is too strict and overreacts. This is not an unusual type of process for a family to come in with. Rather than focusing on the content of what is happening, identifying the circular causality or systems explanation can be a better way to go. For example, this seems to be a reciprocal feedback loop in which increased parental rules lead to increased teen rebellion, which then leads back to increased parental rules. So rather than determining who's correct, which is generally what they want you to do and is going to triangulate you between the two with mother and child or parent and teen, for example, focus on changing the feedback loop. For example, you may want to say, it seems to me that when mom makes rules and daughter Mary says she doesn't want to follow the rules, that just means that mom makes more rules and daughter Mary refuses to follow those rules too. That sounds like a really frustrating cycle that you've gotten into. I'm wondering, in regards to that, Mom, what is it about rules that's so important to you? And Mary, what is it about the rules that you hate so much? Notice by having them talk about the process And if they answer with content answers, moving back to the process about hating rules or liking rules, and what does that occur, that can lead to a much more productive outcome for, at least in this case, if there's a parent and a teen. I'd like you to consider what you can learn about what's happening in a family from the Grape family in the movie What's Eating Gilbert Grape. Because these clips talk to you about who the family members are and what their roles and relationships are, what their emotional expression looks like, and to a degree, what their problem and problem solving is. As you're watching these video clips, which I will put the links in the comments, I'd like you to jot down a brief description of, okay, who are the family members? What's their problem or challenge? What's the primary structure, the roles, the characteristics? What are the interaction patterns that happen in the family? And your initial assessment of the family and how they are able to effectively take care of Arnie. Use these notes in a small group discussion that we're going to have in class. One more thing, though, it's important to consider the role of the worker and how you use yourself. When you're working with a family like the Grapes, you need to ask yourself, okay, what are the boundaries that should be drawn between a worker and a family? How much personal information can you appropriately share with the family? How does the worker balance advocacy for the family versus Arnie's safety? As I mentioned before, how your personal beliefs about family influence your ideas and your assessment about what's going on with the Grape family is also important. And most of these tend to come from our family of origin, our cultural beliefs about what families should or should not do. We'll talk about this during class because most of the answers to these questions are it depends. It's not a matter of there's an absolute right or wrong answer to all of these, but there's a lot of issues that focus on this. And so this is one of the topics that we can talk about during our in-class discussion. Once again, it's helpful for you to consider what you've learned from the readings, from the videos, from the lessons, from this tutorial. What questions do you have? How will you get answers? And what you choose to share in class, something that made sense, a case example, or connections that you made between what you learned in the past and what you're learning now. I look forward to discussing all of these issues with you during class.